Hello, everyone. It's Kani Chavalala, founder of Seize the Light Foundation. And I just wanted to share with you a few of my reflections from my recent participation as a virtual delegate at the World Bank Youth Summit. The summit happened over the last couple of days, and the main event was in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, for those of us who were not selected for in person participation to actually be in Washington, we were afforded virtual participation, access to conversations that were happening over the last few days. For me and my work at Seize the Light Foundation, the conversations were highly relevant of what's happening with the youth and the future of the economy, jobs, markets, and all things in between, because young people really are struggling today. It is estimated that 1.2 billion young people in the emerging markets will reach working age within the next 10 to 15 years, and only 400 million jobs will be created. That obviously means that there's an 800 million job gap, and the conversations that were had over the last few days were sort of aimed at addressing some of the challenges when it comes to the job market. Because one thing I think we have to keep in mind is that the job market has been challenging for the marginalized groups prior to AI and market uncertainty. And now with AI, I think coming into market so aggressively and affecting the certainty that the private sector would historically have around job creation, sector certainty, and of course, geopolitically, we're going through a very difficult time right now. It seems to me that the takeaway is that the youth should be focusing on creating their own opportunities, and entrepreneurship is seems to be a viable pathway that is being recommended to a lot of the youth. In my personal experience, I think that entrepreneurship is a very challenging journey, and it's one that I think you should try and come into once you've gained experience from other people, and maybe that is through formalized employment settings. Even if it is informal, if I'm honest, I think it's just about finding ways that you can cultivate skills, because at the end of the day, if you want to be an entrepreneur or founder, it's leveraging a multifaceted skill set, because businesses today are very diverse. They're not necessarily linear. You're having to think about a lot of verticals all at once. And as a potential business owner, you are, if you want to be in business, you've got to be in politics as well, because unfortunately, wherever you decide to set up your enterprises, or whichever communities you decide to serve, those people will find themselves in certain geographical locations that may be affected by geopolitical crisis, and that will then affect how you deliver your product or service, or how you connect with that community. So it really just requires a high level of flexibility and agility, but nothing is impossible at the end of the day. What's interesting that came from the conversation for me is that with the high level of uncertainty in the private sector, it seems like institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and all the other ancillary organizations that work together aren't necessarily able to predict what are going to be the jobs of the future. And this is quite a catalytic moment, I think, for us in history, because historically these institutions were able to predict, and through predicting, able to then direct capital. And directing capital meant that that capital went towards skills development and upskilling young people in certain jurisdictions that these organizations support, toward the industries and sectors which required a particular skill set at a particular point in time. However, with the emergence of AI, and I would say that AI, I think for me, it seems to be coming along quite aggressively, that everybody's struggling to get to grips of what will be the immediate impact of AI, as in today its implementation, but also some of the long-term consequences that we will see. Because I don't think that anybody, unless you're a fortune teller, can actually predict today what will be the impact on AI. But we can already see that it's changing a lot of how services are being priced, a lot of how work is being done, and also from a job entry level job perspective, it's affecting entry level jobs that the youth would ordinarily have access to. Many of those jobs are being automated, and it's unfortunately hindered the economic participation of the youth at that early stage. And this is why I think conversations that were had over the last couple of days were quite important, because how do we now, I guess, how do we now come together and create a homogenous economy at that entry level for the youth to sort of participate when things are so uncertain at the top? And I must say that, in some of these platforms that I'm in, I I have conversations with people who are at the later end of their careers and maybe a bit more senior in the C suite. And if I'm honest, it just seems to me like everyone is on fire. So it's really difficult for even maybe people who are at a level, I think, of seniority that you would expect leadership, mentorship, and direction from. It is difficult for them in this particular moment to give that leadership or direction, just because of how uncertain things currently are. So even though the advice may be so well intended, nobody has a crystal ball and can actually predict what the circumstance will be like within the next 15 years. And as I say, like AI is it's one of those factors that nobody can really forecast and project, whereas historically, when those forecasting and projections were in the ambit of our human capacity, we were able, I think, to prepare for the future. And I think that's another takeaway from me. How do you prepare the youth for uncertainty? And it's interesting because a lot of the skills that people historically honed in on are no longer relevant in this current market that we're in. It's a skills market that we're currently in. The things that people historically valued are no longer being valued now. So if you are a young person who is at the infancy of their career, what are some of the things that you should even be focusing on? It's a really good question to ask. And in some of the conversations, I mean, people were very helpful, I believe, in highlighting some of those skills that the youth can work on now that will help them in the future. And for me, and of course, our work at Seize the Light, we're so much into like mindfulness and mental health for this very reason. Because if your mental health is not sound or in a good place, it's very difficult for you to see your future with clarity or with positivity. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of a trigger warning, but there were a few stories that also came out of the conference, also the summit, sorry, rather, of people who have unalived themselves because they haven't been able to climb the career ladder, even just starting out. They haven't really been able to find their place, and it makes our work important. But of course, it's saddening because, as I say, I think there isn't much support and direction coming from people and places that it should be coming from. And I think I commend the World Bank on having a very transparent conversation, because usually I think these things are very opaque, and you don't necessarily know how to access certain opportunities or what certain institutions do and how they all play and intersect together. But I think in them coming and out and having these conversations and explaining all the pillars within their organizations and all the opportunities that can be accessed, I think those are the kind of conversations that we need to be having, so that people can at least at the very least understand what are some of the opportunities that can be accessed if they have obviously the right qualification and skill set. So I think everybody seems to be reconciled on the fact that entrepreneurship is going to be the saving grace for the youth. And I don't mean to laugh, but I just think that a lot of people underestimate what it means to be in business, because factually, we are in a market or an economic environment where there have been players operating within those markets without much competition for about 150 years. So you as a founder emerging into those markets and trying to gain your market share, it is going to be extremely difficult. And I'm never a person that sets people up. I always set them up for success. So I always tell both sides of the story. I'd rather not say, oh, like, if you have an idea or you're passionate about something, set it up and go on about your way. I think it's important for us to always tell people about the good parts and the bad parts so that people are prepared. And again, that comes into that preparing the youth for tomorrow. So a bit of, I guess, a bit of founder advice for those that think I want to get into my own ventures. The World Bank, obviously, the word bank is in the name of the institution. So funding was also a huge part of the conversation. And naturally, for people that aspire to be entrepreneurs or founders, they want to know how to access capital. And I think capital and finance in itself is something that needs to be demystified because there's a lot of jargon that's thrown around. I mean, even for somebody like me who was in finance for a decade, now being on the other side, I'm also getting exposed to a lot of terminology that I wouldn't necessarily know that that's the words that we're using, but I understand them for more of an execution and practical perspective. So I can imagine for people that maybe don't have a similar background, whether in finance, in law, it can be a little bit challenging because there's a lot of jargon thrown around. I mean, if you want to put your business through the venture capital route, you're going to be navigating term sheets and equity and all sorts of things that you may not necessarily have the commercial acumen to navigate, but you may have a brilliant idea. So I think one of the bigger considerations is what type of a founder would you want to be? Because you could be a technical founder or a non-technical founder, but also it depends. What type of business are you trying to build? And how are you going to do that? Because I've seen a lot of founders who focus on just fundraising, but then inadvertently you end up being a founder who's focused on fundraising, not necessarily an ops founder, because you aren't really running your business on a day-to-day basis. You aren't really testing your models. You aren't really engaging with your customers or your community. So I think you need to decide, how are you going to start? And I think for me, people also underestimate just the starting, just starting, because I think people think you wake up tomorrow and you start. And I mean, people found businesses under different circumstances. I mean, my circumstances were very different. I didn't have a choice, so I wasn't really given like lots and lots of runway to think and plan. So it was just like jumping, building the plane while flying, and then oh, one wing falls off, great. Well, maybe the plane is flying like this for some time. And then, you get back the wing and it's like, great, I think we're stable now. Oh, turbulence. So it's different. I think like if you were a person who, I don't know, from a young age was like always dreaming about a particular business and an industry and so on and so forth, perhaps with that level of preparedness, you'll be a little bit better. But I mean, statistics say that most VC, PE firms back people who failed a lot in life because it proves that you're able to actually get back up again. And that's what's required for entrepreneurship. So I'm not sure. But that's what I basically want to highlight from the founder side is, if you want to be a founder, you could be a technical founder or non-technical founder. Non-technical founder just means that you don't necessarily have the expertise, skill set, or lived experience to operate within the industry that you want to go into. An example, I mean, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be less successful than a technical founder. I mean, Melanie Perkins, who founded Canva, was a non-technical founder. She didn't have a background in design, in graphic design, yet we're all using Canva. But at the same time, she did get rejected, like I think it was like 100 and something times. But then you sort of question, like, did she get rejected 100 and something times because she didn't have that technical background? I'm not really sure. I haven't really like studied her her funding journey to that level of detail, so I'm not sure. Whereas if you're a technical founder, then that would mean you're actually qualified in graphic design. So when investors look at you, they think, okay, fine, you are qualified in the area that you're trying to get into. You'll understand the ecosystem, the landscape, and so on and so forth. So those are the type of considerations that people trying to give money to people have. I didn't want to make this a long overview because I think there's a lot to take in, and I'll probably try and do another kind of video like this where I just explain a bit more of like what's happening behind the veil, what are some of the things that we're working on. But before I close this one out, I just also wanted to talk a bit about geopolitics and policy, because obviously I'm also operating on the policy side of things where governments themselves are under pressure. I mean, they're supposed to be taking care of their citizens, right? And a large part of that is also helping people gain access to employment opportunities, because a job is dignity, it's a source of income, it sustains your livelihood. So there's also so much pressure from a public policy point, governmental point of view. What are they doing to actually take care of their citizens? And why is that important? It's important because, again, a lot of the finance that we're trying to gain access to and we need to see trickling down also has to come from governmental institutions. So it's kind of got to be a mix between governmental institution, private sector institutions, and everyday people as well. Because if I'm honest, many businesses that we see today were bootstrapped. And I know that some people will say, I don't even have the boot to strap. I don't have the friends and family around. Like, what are you talking about? And I understand that completely. But I think like you can either focus on what you don't have, or you can just focus on what do you have and how can you double down on that to at least create an MVP. Sorry, let me not use technical language. It's a minimal viable product, meaning just like proving your concept. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to solve? Who's the community at the very least? And if I'm honest, that it shouldn't be too difficult, but at the same time, it's extremely difficult, because when you're unestablished and still testing, nobody wants to nobody wants to put their hand up. Nobody wants to run the tests with you. So that is a very challenging time. And for me, I think that's why I'm very big into personal development, because I don't think that you can bring to fruition anything if you don't have an insane amount of self-belief within yourself. Because everyone you knock, every door is going to be closed. Everyone you speak to is going to say it's not possible. You have to keep on knocking, keep on doing, keep on proving. And even once you've done that, like year 1 to 3 doesn't look like year 3 to 5. Like, considerations keep changing, your needs keep iterating, and it does depend on what kind of a founder you want to be. The people that want to scale up and go into VC and PE and all those multiple founding rounds from pre-seed to series, I think now there's like series F or something. That's a different type of life. And you also have to decide, like, is that the type of life you want to live? Because if you're a founder that goes into that area of things, you're accountable to your investors. And of course, like, no one is not going to work hard, whether you are bootstrapping or whether you go through those that VCP cycle. The work is not easy, but do you want to have on that added layer of pressure? And it doesn't necessarily mean that the businesses that have gone through those VCPE rounds are more successful than businesses that haven't. And from the US, I mean, I love listening to entrepreneurship podcasts. The podcast I love listening to, Emma Greed, Aspire. She spoke with Emmy Kule, who is the a founder of a beauty brand. She was in Sephora and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, the business is now closed down. And I really love that episode because she was very transparent about how sometimes a lot of the operating mechanics in a business can sort of hamper your innovation, because you're trying to create credibility, find a board, find the right level of expertise, find the right people for the job. She feels like she spent too much time worrying about the cosmetics of the business as opposed to just execution and operating in the business. And I commend all the founders who are like very transparent about what's gone wrong, because I think for some of us that are still in the journey and are still aspiring to scale, and do big things, we kind of need to know like where are some of the bottlenecks. So I think that that's a very helpful conversation. But at the same time, I think I forgot who was on the panel who said like the youth should just try, because even if you try and you fail, the skills that you would have acquired in trying already sets you apart from someone who hasn't tried. And that I resonate with 100%. And I think that's where I am now, where I try and I'm like, even if it doesn't work out, I will use the skill set I've used in moving from A to B in something else that pops up along the way. Because as I said, turbulence, right? This plane is like never flying in a great altitude. It is what it is. Anyway, so I think, yeah, deciding what exactly what exactly it is you want to bring to fruition. But I do think that it's a deeply personal journey, and if you're creating like a legacy business, that might take time, and that's at your own pace. Nothing wrong. I think some people are so obsessed with like creating unicorns, and I don't think I've created any unicorns. I just think I'm doing things that I like doing, things that make sense, things that full market needs. But for those that are just aspiring to create a unicorn, then there's nothing wrong with that. But I just think some people might not want to start because they're really thinking of like creating something really complex and worrying about business plans and all of these things and boards and the compliance elements of things. And I think some things you have to worry about when you get there. I think if you worry too much about certain things when those things haven't necessarily arisen, you're already like setting yourself up because there's going to be so much to worry about. I think that you need to compartmentalize and try and worry about things as and when they arise. So, yeah. I mean, I think I'd say like everything that I wanted to say just from what happened in the conference, what my main takeaway points were from it. Do I think entrepreneurship will be a saving grace? Yes and no. It needs a lot more. I think it needs a highly supportive landscape. And I was mentioning about the geopolitics and where you'll set up your enterprise. It's going to matter because some countries and environments are a lot more supportive than others, whether that's in terms of startup capital, just a startup ecosystem. But I think even you as a founder, your own ecosystem is also going to matter at the end of the day, and how much human capital you have access to. Because at the end of the day, business is about people, and whether that's you having people in your supply chain that can help you move certain parts over the line, people within your business, always trying to hire the right people. And it's okay if you don't hire the right people. I mean, I'm sure everybody has made a bad hire here and there. That's life. We move. Or and then obviously the biggest human capital in the business is going to be you as the founder. And hence why I say in investing in personal development, invaluable, because entrepreneurship is unfortunately the biggest personal development journey you'll go on. And I say unfortunately because you don't necessarily subscribe to it, but you don't have a choice but to do it, because the success of the enterprise, what you're trying to build, ultimately rests on you. So you have to be working on yourself daily. And that's why you'll find most founders are personal development junkies, because they've understood that actually I need to be my best self to produce the best. So that's all I have on this little segment. And yeah, as I said, I'll probably try and share some more insights. I realized that I hadn't shared any insights from the G20 from last year, so I probably also will try and make some of those insights and those rooms accessible to you guys, because I think it's important, as people, as we gain access to rooms and spaces that people ordinarily don't have access. I think it's important for us to democratize it for other people as much as we can. So I hope that you've enjoyed this little segment, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye.